Imagine your dream home. Every nail, every beam a testament to a future you've been working so hard for. Now imagine that dream turning into a nightmare. A house built on a lie. A house so badly constructed that the front door just fell off. My parents lived that nightmare. But what they did next didn't just save their home, it served a kind of justice so sweet it could only be described as poetic. A justice that forced the people who tormented them to tear down the very monument to their incompetence. If you've ever felt the sweet taste of vindication, hit that subscribe button, like this video, and get ready for a story where justice isn't just served, it's exquisitely crafted. Let's dive in. A dream souring. It was 1973, a different time, simpler in some ways. For my parents, it was a time of boundless hope. They had saved up for years, every penny a brick in the foundation of their future. They were ready to build their first home, a little ranch house in the rolling countryside. They found the perfect plot of land, bought it outright with their savings, and then, with the mortgage from the small local bank, hired a builder named Bob. Bob was, on the surface, a busy man, a local legend, supposedly. He was overbooked, overleveraged, and so full of himself that he barely had time to visit his own projects. He left the work to his team of minions, and I use that word with every bit of the chaotic, clueless energy it implies. At first, my parents trusted the process. Why wouldn't they? They had a signed contract with the bank. The bank had approved the builder. The foundations were poured, the frames went up. But as the weeks stretched into months, the first tremors of unease began to rattle their sense of security. The build was taking longer and longer. And the missteps weren't just simple mistakes, they were acts of pure, baffling incompetence. Picture my parents standing in what was meant to be the master bathroom, staring in disbelief at a perfectly good wall running right through the center of where the bathtub was supposed to go. Bob's minions had built a wall through the bathtub. It wasn't a mistake on their part, though. It was a line the architect forgot to fully erase on the blueprints. But nobody thought to question it. They just built a wall. And that was just the beginning. My mother, a young woman with 2 small children, was spending her days in a miserable rental house, feeling more and more helpless. She'd go over to the construction site and find new horrors. The kitchen cabinets, meant to hold heavy dishes and appliances, were literally nailed to the drywall, not the studs, with a few roofing nails. Don't put anything heavy in them, she was told, as if that were a reasonable request for a kitchen. The garage door opening was framed into the living room, just into the living room. These weren't small errors, they were red flags the size of a billboard. Every day my parents' dream home became more of a Frankenstein's monster. Every bad nail and crooked beam represented a little more of their hope chipping away. The breaking point. My dad was working 2 jobs, exhausted and stretched thin. My mom was home, feeling isolated and powerless. The bank and Bob, meanwhile, treated my parents like a nuisance, like their frustrations were a personal attack. When my mom would point out a major issue, Bob's minions would just laugh it off. The bank's representatives would lie to my dad, telling him the problems were minor and easily fixed. They were bullies. My parents were decent people who just wanted what they had paid for, and they were being treated like they were the problem. My mom would call my dad at the end of the day, her voice thick with tears, detailing the latest insult or shoddy piece of work. My dad, a proud man who worked with his hands, sank into a quiet depression. The stress of it all was eating them alive. Finally, the day of the final inspection arrived. A representative from the bank showed up, ready to sign off on the house and release the final payment to Bob. My parents met him in the front yard. "We're not signing," my dad said, his voice firm despite his inner turmoil. "This house is a disaster." The bank rep was furious. He had already approved so much money for this project. He strode to the front door, ready to prove my parents wrong, ready to pull that doorknob and stride inside with a dismissive smirk. He pulled, and the entire door, casing included, simply fell on him. It wasn't nailed in place, it had just been wedged there. Like a theatrical prop, it tumbled, taking the rep with him. That was the moment the dream died. It was no longer a dream home. It was a monument to incompetence, a trap built of lies and cheap labor. The turnaround. In their desperation, they went to an attorney, a man named Tom. They laid out the entire sorry story. The plumbing problems, the electrical issues, the crooked tile, the wall in the bathtub. My dad, a man who saw the world in straightforward, logical terms, watched Tom's face as he sorted through the paperwork. He could see the pity, the quiet defeat in Tom's eyes. Tom, he felt, knew they were doomed. But then, the most extraordinary thing happened. Abruptly, Tom's face changed. The lines of concern melted away. He broke into a wide, triumphant smile. "Let's get everyone together," he said, his voice brimming with a newfound energy. "A meeting, tomorrow." The next day, my parents sat in a solemn conference room at the bank, across from the bank's representative, their attorney, Bob, and Bob's attorney. The air was thick with tension. The other side was ready to pounce, to bully my parents into submission. But they never got the chance. Tom didn't wait for them to start. He leaned forward, his voice calm and firm. "My clients have decided that they no longer want this house," he announced. "Please remove it." A wave of derisive laughter rippled across the table. Bob and his lawyer snickered. The bank's rep shook his head in disbelief. "Remove it? Have you lost your mind?" And that's when Tom delivered the knockout blow. With a sweeping theatrical gesture, he placed a deed on the table. A simple, elegant document. "My clients," he said, his voice now a steel blade, "own the land this house is sitting on. They bought the land outright with their own savings. We're not in default. We're not being foreclosed on. We simply no longer want the house you built. Get the house off my client's land." A hush fell over the room. Bob's attorney stared at the deed, his face a mask of shock. He slowly turned and looked at his client, his eyes wide. "You built a house on land you don't own?" Bob just nodded, a deer in the headlights. The bank's attorney, his face turning a deep crimson, started yelling at his own representative. "You didn't finance the land?" The rep stammered. No?" Tom, the master of this moment, didn't miss a beat. He drove the point home, his voice cutting through the panic. "As I said, gentlemen, you are trespassing on my client's land. I expect this house to be removed and the land returned to its original state at once." My dad would later say that the look on their faces was a sight he would cherish forever, a moment of perfect, stupefying silence. The bank, which had threatened to foreclose, now had nothing to foreclose on. They had given Bob a small fortune to build a house, but they didn't even own the land it was on. Bob was out thousands of dollars, and now he was on the hook to tear down the very monstrosity he built. My parents were now in a position of power. They were no longer victims. They were the ones who held all the cards. Their lawyer, with one simple move, had turned the tables completely. Suddenly, my parents were good people, and it was all such a misunderstanding. The bank and Bob couldn't do enough for them. The sweet taste of victory. The house was brought into line with the original blueprints and specifications immediately. Bob, at his own considerable expense, had to bring in a new, competent crew to fix every single one of his minions' mistakes. My parents signed the mortgage. Bob got the rest of his money, but he barely broke even. The bank's representative was fired. Justice, finally, was served. Not through a bitter court battle, but through a brilliant act of legal jujitsu. Tom, the lawyer, got a stinging tale of triumph he'd tell for the rest of his life. And my parents, after months of fear and frustration, finally got the home they had dreamed of. A home no longer built on a lie, but on a foundation of vindication. This story isn't just about a bad builder and a faulty house. It's about the quiet dignity of two people who refuse to be bullied, and the breathtaking moment when an underdog turns the tables. It's a reminder that sometimes the most satisfying revenge isn't loud or violent, but clever, precise, and perfectly legal. Have you ever felt the sweet sting of justice? Tell me your story in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this tale of a dream home built on a nightmare and a front door that taught an important lesson.